Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are beginning from again question number one, part E, where we stopped initially. All right. Part E asks us to draw a demand and a supply diagram to show reports stating that bananas are good for health and how would it affect the market for bananas. It's a very easy peasy part. It's a 4 marker, and you'll be awarded straight 4 marks if you have mentioned the vertical and the horizontal axis all correctly. If price is mentioned on the vertical axis and quantity is mentioned on the horizontal axis. If the demand and the supply curve initially you've drawn is correct, again 1 mark will be awarded to you. If you've shown the correct shift towards the right-hand side, again 1 mark will be awarded to you. And finally, the last mark will be awarded to you if you mark the equilibrium positions all correctly, either by way of writing E1 or E2, or you can also go by saying P1 and Q1 was the initial equilibrium, and now P2 and Q2 are the new equilibrium position. All right, so what would happen if there's a report published that says bananas are good for health? Obviously, you'll see a shift in the demand, where the demand curve have to shift, the demand will rise, which will cause the demand curve to shift towards the right-hand side. And when the demand curve will shift, there will be a rise in the price. You can see in the diagram that the price has risen from P1 to P2, and the quantity demanded has risen from Q1 to Q2. That's it. They are not asking you for an explanation. You've fulfilled all these 4 requirements. 4 marks straightforward will be awarded to you. However, if you want to write supporting statements in order to justify the diagram you've drawn, you can go ahead and do that. And you can say that the report which states that bananas are good for health has caused the demand to rise from D1 to D2. As a result, the price has risen from P1 to P2, and the quantity demanded also has risen from Q1 to Q2. Hence, the new equilibrium position is now E2. All right. Let's look at part F. Part F says analyze the relationship between the percentage of the population living in poverty and life expectancy. Now, the keyword over here is analyze. Now, what we do in the questions which talk about analyze is that first we try to find out the relationship that is present in the two variables, whatever is mentioned in the question. The two variables present in this question is the percentage of the population living in poverty and life expectancy. So remember earlier when we were reading the text, I showed you the table and we said we need to depict the relationship that the table is trying to tell us. So, and then we are going to try and find evidence to justify the relationship that we have figured out. And then we'll present an analysis of that evidence that we are presenting. So, let me show you the table. This was the table that we were studying. All right. Now, if you look closely at the table, the countries that I have marked in ascending order are those which have the least amount of their population living in poverty and have the highest amount of life expectancy, right? So the relationship that we can deduce is that the lesser the amount of population living in poverty, the higher the life expectancy, or we could say vice versa as well. So the relationship is inverse, right? It's a negative relationship. So the first thing we are going to say is that there exists a negative relationship between the percentage of population living in poverty and life expectancy. Why? Because the higher the level of poverty, the lower the life expectancy. Or the lower the level of poverty, the higher would be the life expectancy. See? So once you mention both of these 2 points, 2 marks straightforward has been awarded to you by the examiner, right? Now, you give your evidence. Now, you're stating this, but then you need to produce an evidence. Why are you still saying this? First, we said, yes, negative or inverse relationship is present. Then we went around saying that, yes, we are saying this because there was a higher level of population living in poverty means there is a lower will be the life expectancy. Now you give this supporting evidence. Why are you saying this? You need to justify your statement because we'll say 4 countries with the lowest level of population living in poverty have the highest level of life expectation, have the highest life expectancy, right? For instance, since Sweden has 0.2% of the population living in poverty and the life expectancy is 83 years, it's followed by Maldives, 3.5% population living in poverty, and 79 is the life expectancy in years. Then it's followed by Honduras, 16.9% population of people living in poverty, and the life expectancy 75 years, which is then followed by Kenya, 37.1% of the population living in poverty, and the life expectancy of 66 years, right? we can also say the two countries with the highest level of poverty living in poverty, with the highest level in poverty, have the lowest level of life expectation, which includes Chad and South Sudan, right? All right. Now, so far, so good. Whatever the reasoning and the analysis and the relationship we found is satisfying our initial statement, the relationship we figured out. However, there exists an anomaly. An um, there exists an anomaly, and there exists an exception to the analysis that we have figured out. And what is the exception? The exception is in Chad and South Sudan. Now, if you look at Chad, the percentage of population living in poverty is 38.1%, and the life expectancy is 54 years. And if you look at South Sudan, the percentage of population living in poverty is 44.7%, and the life expectancy is 58 years. Now, if South Sudan has a greater percentage of population living in poverty as compared to Chad, its life expectancy by the rule that we figured out should have been lesser, right? If more percentage of the population is living in poverty, so the life expectancy should have been lesser than Chad's. But in this case, it's not so. So this is the exception that we have figured out, right? Except, we'll mention in the answer, except for Chad and South Sudan. And how, why, what makes you say that? You're going to mention that because 38% of the population living in poverty, Chad has a life expectancy of 54 years. On the contrary, South Sudan, with a population of poverty, percentage of population living in poverty 44.7%, has a higher life expectancy of 58 years. So then you're going to say, what makes you say that? What could be the reason behind this? We could say that this shows that there are other reasons behind this exception. It could be owing to the fact of war or crime rates. Maybe perhaps Chad has a higher crime rates, or maybe uh, it's in their genetics that the life expectancy they have is lesser, or it could be maybe wars or crime rates. Okay, you need to attribute the reasoning behind this exception too. So you figured out the justification behind your exception. So you've satisfied all these four, you've met all these five criteria, and meeting all these five criteria would yield you 5 marks. That was the max mark for this part. All right. So far, so good. I hope so. You are all with me. Let's look at part G. Part G says, discuss whether or not the cost of producing clothes in Honduras will fall in future. So now, again, it's a discuss question. It's a 6 marker. The discuss questions, I told you earlier as well, that you need to construct ideally 3 paragraphs for it, one supporting the statement, one against the statement, and finally the last one with an evaluative statement justifying your reasoning. And in order to find the points validating the statement or going against the statement, there are enough hints given in the later response, and you need to figure it out, and then you need to use it accordingly, presenting your argument. All right, now it says discuss whether or not the cost of producing clothes in Honduras will fall in future. Now, the text initially had told us that training was being provided and the working conditions were being improved, and the firm was also employing more of capital goods. So we'll make use of all of these 3 points, and we'll try to build an answer saying that it could be that the cost of producing clothes in Honduras might fall in the future. Why? Because training is being provided to the employees, and as a result of higher levels of training, the efficiency is going to increase, more higher levels of output per unit of input, and as a result, it would cause the labor cost to fall. And when the labor cost will fall, obviously the cost of producing clothes will fall. You can also say that it could also be attributed to the fact that the firms are now going to employ more of capital goods. So when capital goods are going to be employed more, so it would be less prone to errors, and as a result, there would be higher levels of production. It could also be because of the fact that the cost of producing clothes might fall in Honduras because of better working conditions is being now offered to the employees. We all know that when the working conditions are better, the employees and the staff is all motivated, and you can witness a boost in their productivity levels, and hence the higher level of output would mean that the firms are achieving higher economies of scale, the firms will grow in size, and which will lead towards lower levels of average cost. However, in the second paragraph, we'll say, it might be that the cost of producing clothes in Honduras might not fall. Because training in better working conditions being offered to the employees involve a cost. They are costly. They might add up to the cost of a firm. Furthermore, using capital goods, initially the cost of employing capital goods and getting hold of capital goods is expensive. They require large amounts of fixed costs, and which might cause the firm to experience diseconomies of scale. And what was diseconomies of scale? It is when problems occur that cause unit costs to rise, as we all know, as firms expand beyond their optimum size. However, you could go also about saying that unemployment could also, since we knew that unemployment was falling, it could be that the firms might find it difficult to now get hold of trained and uh, good highly skilled labor, which would cause them to press for higher wages, and the cost of labor would rise, causing the firm's cost of production to increase. Finally, you'll give your evaluative statement, whichever side you are finding to go with, justifying your reasoning in the last paragraph. All right. You could say that if the or you could say if the inflation or a bad weather might contribute towards the cost of rising production of cloths, towards the cost of production of costs of clothing in Honduras, and which could be that the cost of producing clothes might rise in future. If the inflation is higher than the amount of benefits that the higher levels of training and employment of capital goods would be yielding, so then it would be that the cost of producing clothes in Honduras might rise in the near future, right? All right. Part H is again a discuss question, and in part H, this asks us to they are saying discuss whether or not a fall in unemployment in Honduras is likely to cause inflation. Now they are asking you that what do you think? A higher level of employment level will cause inflation or not? That means unemployment is falling. So what do you say? Again, it's a 6 marker, and we say that yes, it might cause inflation because it's getting difficult to hire labor. It will lead to shortage of labor, and again, the bargaining power of labor would increase. The moment you've mentioned now, acha, let me tell you, the points that I've mentioned are all the points that you could have written in your answer, but it does not mean that you need to reproduce all of these points. A maximum of 3 to 4 points, and then building upon all those points will yield you marks for that particular side, like 3 to 4 points for each side, building upon those points, and 4 points for each side, building upon those points, and then the final paragraph in evaluative statement, justifying and convincing the examiner with your evaluation. I put in the marks on top of each point. I'm trying to tell you that once you've mentioned these words, or once you've mentioned these points straightly, you've been awarded 1 mark by the examiner. Now, if your answer is only tipped towards one end, it's only a one-sided answer, so max you can get on that answer would be 4 marks, right? 4 marks for just producing one side of the argument. That is why I keep on telling my students that when the question has got the command word of discuss, you need to produce both sides of the argument, and it should be a well-constructed, a well-thought, a well-built answer with a chain of analysis, with sound reasoning, with supportive statements. In the end, convincing the examiner with your evaluation. You see, so far, so good. Your evaluation will not be questioned by the examiner if you have convinced him. If you've convinced him with your justification, your evaluation is going to be correct. So always write thoughtful answer whenever the question carries a discuss command word. All right. So the first point we say is, okay, it will be difficult to hire labor. Shortage of labor will occur, bargaining power of labor would be high, and since unemployment is already low, a further fall in wages would mean that there would be a cost pull inflation. See, you need to do not write a layman answer. Produce economic terminology. Refer to the concepts that you've been taught by your teachers. Refer to the economic terminology to score high. That is where the examiner differentiates a high quality response to a low quality response. He can figure it out that yes, such and such candidate is acquainted with the economic terminology. This is where you can distinguish and classify a higher level of response to a low score response. All right. You can also say that incomes will be rising. Why? Because unemployment is low, so consumer spending will be increasing. There will be an increase in aggregate demand. And again, when aggregate demand outstrips aggregate supply, too much money chasing too few goods, what happens? Exactly, there will be demand pull inflation. So you see how nicely we've brought up both the two concepts of inflation. You are relating it into inflation. You're now talking about there could be two possible sides of inflation happening. At the same time, there could be cost pull inflation if there is difficult to hire labor. At the same time, there could be demand pull inflation because aggregate spending might outstrip aggregate supply. All right. So you see how beautifully we've put forward our argument. And inflation already exists. So again, the wages could be pressed for higher wages by the labor. However, you could say that it might not be possible that a fall in unemployment in Honduras is likely to cause inflation. Why? Because we remember we read earlier the last paragraph in the case stated that the country was using progressive income tax system. So when progressive income tax system is used, uh, the government would be able to get hold of higher tax revenue, and it could be possible that spending might not be increasing. And since unemployment is falling, so the government is now no more providing unemployment benefits to the employees, to the people, to the labor force, and it's getting increased tax revenue on the other hand. So there could be a budget deficit, a fall in the budget deficit, right? We also knew that investments were increasing. So when investments are increasing, aggregate supply is increasing. So when aggregate supply is increasing, so the point that we mentioned earlier that it could be that aggregate demand was outstripping aggregate supply and cost per inflation could occur. So we could say no. Now, since investment are increasing, aggregate supply would increasing, the production level would be able to meet the surge in demand. So it could mean that cost per inflation would fall. So the notion that unemployment, lower levels of unemployment would be yielding to higher levels of inflation is being no longer justified because we said that investments might be able to, a higher level of investment might be able to meet the surge in demand. And the last point, which I really appreciate, is that a fall in unemployment does not always mean a rise in employment level. Because remember, when we were reading the chapter of unemployment, we read this that when unemployment level is reducing does not mean that employment level would rise at the same time. Why? Think because there might be people who were working earlier, now they've fallen sick, they're no more part of the labor force, they've quit working, or they went back to getting education, they're not part of the labor force now, or it could be that they have retired, they're no more part of the labor force, right? All right. Finally, in the last paragraph, you produce your statement, evaluative statement justifying. You could say that maybe because the investments are going to increase, it could be possible that a higher level of supply would be meeting the surge in demand, and it could be that there might not be higher levels of inflation being experienced by Honduras in future. All right, let's move towards section 2. Section 2 carries 4 questions, out of which you need to answer any 3, 20 marks for each question, and 30 minutes max to be spent in answering each question in section B. All right, let's read the first question. Question number 2. It says Botswana uses both capital goods and labor in its diamond mining industry. All right, it's making use of both capital and labor. The country had an average economic growth rate of 3.8% between 2015 and 2019, compared to a global average of 2.8%. Over this period, the country experienced a low inflation rate and a move away from protectionism and towards free international trade. So now the plus point Botswana is having is that it is enjoying a relatively higher growth level than the world was at that time, 3.8% as compared to the world's 2.8%. It was better off. And the country was also at the same time having a low inflation rate. And the country was moving away from protectionism towards free international trade. So earlier it could have been that the government would have been supporting the domestic industries by way use of tariffs and quotas and bans and subsidies, and now it was moving towards free trade. So now the first question, the first part they ask is define with an example a capital good. It's a 2 mark. First, 1 mark you will be awarded straightforward if you produce a definition, and 1 mark is for the example. All right. No need to produce long and lengthy answers when it comes to definition. Be precise, be crisp. Sometimes it happens that a candidate, or due to exam stress and anxiety, we tend to forget what the definition could be. In that case, still the examiner allows you to produce an explanation, but yet it should not be too verbose or too wordy or too rambling around, beating around the bush. It should be maybe around somewhere between 2 to 3 lines, but then it should make sense, right? It should make use of good economic terminology if you are unable to reproduce a definition. But otherwise, yes, when it comes to defining, you need to be precise, you need to be crisp. All right. All right. So it says capital good. So you can say capital good is our human-made resources that do not satisfy an immediate consumer want because they are used in the production of other goods and services. You can write any example. I've mentioned 4. Go ahead with writing any one of them you find easier to recall or remember. Machine, tools, factories, offices. They're all examples of capital good. Mention the definition, mention the example, straightforward, 2 marks, you being awarded by the candidate, by the examiner. So far, so good. Easy. I hope you all are getting it and all are with me. Part B says, explain 2 reasons why a low inflation rate may increase a country's economic growth rate. Now, 4 marks. How is marking being distributed in this part? You've mentioned the first reason, build upon that, 2 marks. Mention the second reason, give an explanation for that, further 2 marks. This is how 4 marks are being awarded to you, right? If you just stated the points and you've not mentioned, you've not built upon that, only 2 marks will be awarded. All right. So you need to explain your answer. Explain 2 reasons why a low inflation rate will be able to increase economic growth rate. You will say a low inflation rate would boost investors' confidence, and so the level of uncertainty would reduce in the economy, and as a result, investments would rise, leading towards higher levels of economic growth rate. The second point, you might say that a low inflation rate would mean that the cost would be low, the production would increase, the firms would be able to produce more goods, and when the cost of production would be low, so the exports would be price competitive, and as a result, imports would fall, exports would rise, and the country would witness a higher levels of economic growth rate. The standard of living will rise, right? All right, so you've written these answers, you found the valid points, and you built upon those answers, you've explained them well. 4 marks. Part C. Part C is an analyzed question. Again, you need to find the relationship, the cause and effect relationship, and you need to build your answer upon it. You need to say why you think that how the government is reducing protectionism and moving towards free international trade. So first, you'll think upon all the tools that comes under protectionism, and you will talk about what is actually protectionism. So we know that protectionism is the use of trade barriers by governments to protect their domestic industries and employment from global competition, right? Now, I've mentioned all the possible tools that falls under protectionism. However, again, it's a 6 mark. I have mentioned 1 marks on each of the point that you're going to mention. So you're going to see 4 points, building upon them will yield you 6 marks, score full in this part. All right. So how do you think the government is reducing protectionism and moving towards free trade? You can say by way of removing tariffs, what would happen? The price of imported goods would fall. So if those imported goods are part of the production process of any of the goods being used in by your domestic industries, it could be a key ingredient, a key raw material. So what would happen? The cost of production will fall and firms will be able to compete, right? So see, if you mention each of these 4 points that I mentioned in my first bullet, you get straightforward 4 marks. Usually the students keep on asking me, Miss, how many marks can we get in this question? How many points should we be answering? So I keep on telling them it depends on the quality of your response. It's never a quantitative aspect as long as your answer is a high quality response. It matters more on the quality. It matters more on how good you've made use of the economic terminology in your question, how crystallized you have produced the response, convincing the examiner that yes, this candidate should get a higher score. All right. You can say that yes, removing quotas, uplifting bans would also promote higher levels of free trade. The government stopped giving subsidies to its domestic industries. Artificial protection will fall. That's also a movement towards free trade. And when the other countries would see Botswana following, moving towards free trade and going out of protectionism, they would also retaliate and they would also follow. And as a result, free trade will boost. All right. So then the easy part. Part B. Part B says discuss whether or not a country will benefit from diamond mining. Now, this is an 8 mark, right? Now, again, two sides of the argument, the last paragraph, an evaluative statement justifying your reasoning. Now, you could say that yes, a country can benefit from diamond mining. Why? Because if you see that the demand for diamonds is usually high in the world, and if a country goes ahead with mining of diamond, so exports would increase, its exports revenue will rise, which will cause that there will be a favorable balance of payment. Current account would be favorable, right? The deficit might reduce, or the current account would be in a favorable position. And when the country is investing in trading of in mining, so obviously the labor force will be more required, and the unemployment levels will reduce, the employment level will rise, and obviously it would be exporting its output. So exports will rise, more foreign exchange to the countries, standard of living will rise, economic growth will be witnessed by the country. However, you could say that it might not benefit. Why it might not benefit? Because my diamonds are a natural resource, and it might be possible that the rate at which they are excavating it and the rate at which they are exporting it might cause this natural resource to deplete, right? And going for mining, we all know that maybe a move towards mining of diamonds would go for would be resulting in higher level of externalities, so in the form of pollution. So it might not be benefiting the economy then if the externalities are higher, there are negative externalities rather than the benefits that it's yielding. And you could also say that maybe diamond mining is not a large part of GDP, so the benefits that we thought it might be bringing to the economy in the form of higher standard of living or higher levels of economic growth, it might not be reaping those benefits by moving towards mining of diamonds. Or you could also say that it might be possible that there might be a global recession, so the demand for diamonds is likely to fall. Then you could also say that usually the MNCs are interested in the mining and exploration of these minerals in countries. So it could be that instead of utilizing the profits that the MNCs would be earning by way of mining in the host country, it could be that they are going for repatriation of their profits to their home country. So it could be that the host country is not at all benefiting from the mining of diamonds, right? Again, an evaluative statement you could produce and you could close the answer. Question 3. Question number 3 says, in 2020, some firms in Suriname, a South American country, stopped production. This was because the firms could not cover their variable costs as well as some of their fixed costs. The reduction in the country's output resulted in a rise in its employment rate. The government used supply-side policy measures to reduce unemployment. In 2021, the number of firms in some markets fell again, but the time it was when output was rising. Define with example a fixed cost. It's a 2-marker. First mark you will be awarded as soon as you present a definition, and when you've given an example, the second mark will be awarded to you. All right, so what's the question is saying? It's a South American country and it had stopped production because they were unable to cover their variable costs and they were also not able to cover their fixed costs. And obviously, when you're not able to cover your fixed and variable costs, the firm stopped its production. When it stopped its production, it would lay off labor, the unemployment rate rose. So the government tried to make use of supply side policy measures to reduce the level of unemployment, increase the level of employment level. And in 2021, the number of firms in the markets again fell, but this time the output was rising. So the first part they are asking you, explain fixed cost. We all know fixed cost is a cost that does not change with the level of output, or it is a cost that has to be paid even when the level of output is 0. Simple. An example you can say is rent. All right. Part B asks you to explain two types of unemployment. We all know there are, broadly speaking, there are three categories of unemployment. I have mentioned in my answer all three. However, you could go about by explaining any two, whichever you find reasonable. And you can say that it could be frictional, structural, or cyclical unemployment. You will mention it, and then you need to also produce the subparts of it. In frictional unemployment, you can say frictional is temporary unemployment arising from workers being in between jobs. One form of frictional unemployment is such unemployment that occurs when workers do not accept the first job offered, but instead keep on looking for an acceptable job. Casual and seasonal are also its forms. Casual unemployment occurs between periods of unemployment. Seasonal unemployment occurs affect workers whose labor is not in demand during certain periods of the year. Right? Farming के होते हैं and actors होते हैं. You could say structural unemployment is a type of unemployment when the entire decline of industries is there, or particular occupations arising from long-term changes in demand and supply. Now, it could take again two forms, either in the form of regional unemployment, if it is concentrated in a particular geographical location, or again, it could be in the form of technological unemployment if it occurs because of a change in information technology causing workers to become redundant. Remember, floppy disks now no longer being used. All right. However, if any of the previous two mentioned, you are not going to write that, you can go for cyclical unemployment. This is the most serious type of unemployment that occurs from, we all know, by lack of aggregate demand, when there's demand deficient unemployment, and when economy is going through a recession, so the demand for labor will fall and cyclical unemployment will occur. Part C says, analyze how supply-side policy measures could reduce unemployment. Now, the type of any supply-side tool you are going to pick, you are going to say how that supply-side policy measure is going to actually cater the type of unemployment being measured, right? So what sort of unemployment is each supply-side policy catering to, is aiming at? That's the question here. So there are multiple supply-side policy measures. We all know first what are supply-side policy measures. Supply-side policies aim to boost a country's productive potential, or aim to boost the productive potential of the economy. All right. So there are a lot of supply side policy tools at the country's disposal. It could be spending on education. When the country spends on education, the level of skills and the level of qualification rise. As a result, the mobility of labor increases, causing structural unemployment to fall. Or you could say decreasing the amount of unemployment benefits would convince or would encourage the people to look for jobs, and as a result, frictional unemployment will reduce. Or you could say spending more on healthcare would mean there would be a healthy labor force, the productivity of labor would increase, and as a result, unemployment will fall. Or you could say by decreasing the level of taxation, income tax. So what would happen? Firms would be having more tax for them, so they would be investing more in research and development, and as a result, the employees would also be having more income, disposable income. So they will be encouraged to look out for jobs, right? Firms will expand for their production, and people will also be able to look for jobs. Why? Because no more, there are lesser amount being taxed out of their income, so the level of unemployment will fall. It could also be possible that the government is giving subsidies to the local firms. As a result, the cost of production will fall. The firms will expand their production level, and overall the unemployment level will fall, because higher levels of production means more demand for labor. Minimum wage legislation could also be one of the tools at their hand. Employers would hire more labor, people would be searching for more jobs, and unemployment would fall. All right, so moving on to part D. Part D is a discuss question. Part D says, discuss whether or not having fewer firms in a market will benefit consumers. So if there are fewer firms in a market, how will consumers benefit? Again, it's an 8-marker question. Present both sides and evaluate a statement in the end, 3 paragraphs. You see how, put yourself in your shoes and see if there are few firms in your economy, how will you benefit? If there are few firms in the economy and looking from the perspective of the consumer, it would yield towards easy decision making. There will be less clutter in the market. It could be that there would be high quality goods, right? Fewer firms, so the quality of the output is higher, and it could be that the cost of their production is less, enabling them to transfer this benefit to the consumers in the form of lower prices. And firms that were previously there, they might be causing a lot of externalities in the economy. So now they being shut down is now causing lesser externalities in the society now. Or you could say that no, having fewer firms in the market might not be at all beneficial to the consumers. It might create a monopoly situation.